Good evening, folks. My name's William John Cox. I'm here to invite you to another happy hour discussion of politics and philosophy. I ask you to join with me and my friend Joann for another happy hour discussion. Cheers, Joann.
Cheers. I have to say, tonight I have water because it's the middle of the week and I already had a drink and I'm like,
Okay,
yeah. So I'm sorry, I'm joining you. I'm toasting you anyway. Yeah.
okay. So what's up, Joann? What do you want to talk about?
Well, there's something that really kind of made an impression on me over the past week or so in the New York Times. There was an op-ed piece. Actually, it was like a video op-ed, and it was an interview with 12 departing members of Congress. All I think they were all from the House of Representatives, and a mixture of Democrats and Republicans. And they were all like interviewed, and they were all asked the same set of questions. And one of them, I mean, like, was what was the main? What's the top word you would use to describe Congress? And the main word they used was dysfunctional. That was the word they used. And why? And some of them have been in Congress for a while, and they said that it's only gotten increasingly more dysfunctional over time, and now is the worst they've ever seen it. And then, it was just a really interesting sort of short video piece in the New York Times, and it really raised a lot of questions for me. It was interesting, though, because one of the questions they asked was all the Congress people, they said, well, in your time of Congress, do you feel like you've done anything really important? And actually, what was interesting to that is that they all said yes. And they cited bills they've been on and how incredible it was to have this opportunity to like pass legislation. So it was like all of them felt like they had had some positive impact in a way that only being a member of Congress you could ever do, right? But overall, there was this sense that it's become more dysfunctional over time. And then the last thing was this guy said that he's like been looking into, he's on some committee that looks into making Congress more efficient or more whatever. And so he's come up with a whole list of recommendations that's now being circulated. But it kind of left me as after, it's maybe a 12-minute piece on New York Times. After I was watching all these different people have, all their kind of perspectives on having been in Congress and what it was like. And they all said, the other thing is that a lot of them in the past, people actually moved to DC with their families to, participate in Congress. And that doesn't happen anymore. People like come in, they fly out. And the fact that they don't actually interact in the city together also has created some of this capacity for more friction because they don't they don't have that interpersonal sort of relationship as much. But overall, I mean, to me, it was really interesting because I felt like it was really a clear picture of this moment politically, where there is a sense of where we've become so divided, the whole thing, we've become so divided. Congress is so dysfunctional. But also in that moment when they were talking about their jobs, you could see the spark in them. Like they did have a moment that they thought they would have, they did have that. It wasn't like there was none of that left. It was just that they'd become so disenchanted with most of what they had to do in Congress that they just decided they're done. They want to leave. So it just left me with this feeling of what is it that we can do to fix Congress? I mean, because it feels like we really need to. Just that moment, that like spark they had in their eye when they talked about the good things that they were able to do, just made me realize that there's something worth saving in this institution.
Right.
Right. And how do we do that? how do we do that? Because there's something really, because it feels also at the same time like we're at a real dangerous moment too for the institution.
Right.
Of the House of Representatives in particular. So that's kind of that kind of made me think it would be worth discussing those impressions and that point that we're at. It seems like we're at with Congress.
Well, I think it's critical. When our country was first founded, we grew from the parliamentarian system in England,
right,
where you had a king, and who was a powerful king at that point, but still subject to the rule of law. ever since the that had been established for a long time. But even still, the founders of our country wanted there to be a strong Congress. I mean, Congress really, if you look at the Constitution, the portion of the Constitution that establishes our government starts off with Article 1, and the Article 1 establishes the Congress. I mean, that's really our government. And it goes on for page after page after page, and it describes the role of Congress in making laws and what the powers are. And it does impose some limits on Congress, of course, because that was something that they wanted as far as their government. But then they had also suffered under the Confederacy for not having a strong executive. So they wanted to have a strong executive. So they established and they vested all powers of the executive in a single president. And without really much more of a description, except to say that he shall faithfully execute the laws. And that's the way it was really intended. Congress makes the law, the president executes the law.
The executive, right? Yeah.
And then there's only just a brief mention of the Supreme Court in the Constitution. But what has happened is that we've evolved to having a unitary executive. And the unitary executive concept is that since the power of the executive is vested in the president, that means that the entire government that exists under the executive branch, and that's all the branches, the Attorney General, the Justice Department, all of these departments and everything are really under the president. The Department of State, the Department of Labor, all of these things are under the president. And so that has sort of become, the government has become the executive branch, and the Congress is really has been relegated to a subsidiary role, especially since the president can issue his executive orders. And so that's where we are today. And that's a very dangerous thing, because Congress has given the president emergency powers. There's like more than 100 bills have been passed by Congress that gives the president extraordinary powers. I mean, the president can suddenly suspend the entire internet, turn it off in case of an emergency. He can do a lot.
National security, right?
Yeah, in the name of security. So that's all well and good if you have someone who follows the law. So now we are confronted with a situation. What do you do if the executive refuses to obey the law? And that's exactly where we are today. And
frightening.
It is sort of frightening. But your question is the best question of the evening. I mentioned that, this other stuff. But how do we reform Congress? How do we restore our government so that it works for the people? And that is, I think, the critical question. And that is why I think the Voters' Bill of Rights, there is no alternative to it, because there's nothing else out there like it. There are other portions, or there are public special interest groups that will have one thing, campaign financing, or to deal with the Electoral College, or single issue questions. But to deal with the full spectrum is the Voters' Bill of Rights. And it's sort of like having a car. You can go along and you can patch a tire, you can fix the fan belt, you can change the oil, you can do this or you can do that. But if you keep driving that car long enough, sooner or later you're going to have to do a major overhaul. I mean, you're going to have to pull the engine, you're going to have to, replace the tires, you're going to have to replace the transmission. And that's where we are today. I mean, we're more than 200 years into this government, and it's just simply no longer functioning. It is no longer the government of the people at all. It is, and especially because of corporate power. When corporations were able to get constitutional rights, then suddenly it's just like, there's no question as to who has the power after that. So what can we do? We can look at the Voters' Bill of Rights, because it deals with all of these issues, and we can go through them, and there's more sections that we can go through in one night. But what I'd like to do is just very quickly run through the
core
first
tenets.
8 sections real quickly, because some of them are just like checkoffs, So just to start from the top quickly. And that is the right of all citizens of the United States who are 18 years or older to cast effective votes in political elections is inherent under this Constitution and shall not be denied or abridged. Check. I mean, can anyone really deny that we should have the constitutional right to vote?
Don't we already?
No, we don't. In the Constitution, we do not have a right to vote. The Constitution was set up at a time when people didn't have the right to vote.
That's right. There wasn't.
A portion of the people were enslaved. In most states, you had to be a property owner to vote, and even have property of a certain value to vote. So, and certainly women didn't have the right to vote.
Right.
So, which brings us to Section 2. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. I mean, how can we have equal voting rights if half of the people in this country have to go to the 14th Amendment and try to bring their rights into focus because they are being denied equal protection of the law? So,
yeah, it's basically thing. I love that. Yeah,
okay,
that's great. Yeah.
And then Section 3, the states shall ensure that all citizens who are eligible to vote are registered to vote.
So it's making it actually a duty of the state instead of a responsibility of the voter.
Right. It is imposing on the states the burden to ensure that all of its citizens who are eligible to vote are registered to vote. And in balancing the public benefit of a maximum voter participation with the prevention of voting fraud, Congress and the states shall not impose any unjustifiable restriction on registration or voting by citizens. I mean, it's like this whole thing on voter fraud. I mean, there are only a dozen cases over the last 20 years of voter fraud. I mean, it just simply doesn't happen. And most of those are just mistakes where people thought they were qualified to vote or they didn't. But then and today what we have is, and this goes back, this is sort of bipartisan. This isn't even, and that is the suppression of voting. Each party would be happy if certain people didn't vote, but the intentional suppression of voting is hereby prohibited. And in addition, any other penalty, any person convicted of the intentional suppression of voting shall be ineligible for public office for a period of 5 years. So we must have a greater participation in voting. Otherwise, we have what we have today, and that is minority government. Our government really is elected by 25% of the people, because half of the people in the country don't vote.
And do they not vote because they're not engaged, or do they not vote because it's made too difficult? I mean, how do you diagnose why people don't vote?
I think by and large, they don't think it makes any difference. Their vote isn't really that important. They just have no real feeling that it is their government, particularly anymore.
Okay. Yeah.
Then, to move on, Section 4. The rights protected by the Constitution are the rights of natural persons only.
No more Citizens United.
No more Citizens United needed. And artificial entities established by the laws of any state, the United States, or any foreign state shall have no rights under this Constitution and are subject to regulation by the people through federal, state, and local law. The privileges of artificial entities shall be determined by the people through federal, state, and local law, and shall not be construed to be inherent or inalienable. That in itself is probably the most important thing we can do today to save our government. Is to, you know, and if we had a Supreme Court that truly were originalist,
Yeah, really. They would
were
believe
given,
in natural persons only who would have, yeah, exactly. This originalist thing is such a load of BS because there, I mean, it's just a way to pick what you want to be originalist about.
right.
You know,
How are they going to deal with immunity? You know, presidential immunity. Where's that in the Constitution? You know, that has to do with this unitary presidency, unitary
right.
executive.
Making it even more
Right.
powerful and unitary. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. So check. Okay. Federal and local government shall regulate, limit, or prohibit contributions and expenditures to ensure that all citizens, regardless of their economic status, have access to the political process, and that no person gains as a result of their money substantially more access or ability to influence in any way the election of any candidate for public office or any ballot measure. Federal, state, and local governments shall require that any permissible contributions and expenditures be publicly disclosed, and the judiciary shall not construe the spending of money to influence elections to be speech under the First Amendment. Money is not speech.
Right. It doesn't get to be protected like free speech. Yeah.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And
Huh.
if it were, what it is that these very rich people who are pouring millions of dollars into these campaigns they have a megaphone. They can shout louder than any of us. And that is, if we just get the money, we get the money out of politics, then and regulate that, then we will have a safer government that will be more responsive to the people instead of those who
Special interests.
who
Mhm.
pay the salaries or pay the bribes to these people. Okay. Then because of that, though, it's important to reiterate that nothing contained in this article shall be construed to abridge the freedom of the press, which includes electronic and digital publication. Okay, just a couple of more quick things.
Yeah, that's cool.
In balancing the public benefits of corruption-free elections with allowing candidates to accept private campaign contributions, Congress and the states shall favor public financing over private contributions. This is also broadcasters using the public airways shall provide free airtime for political campaign programming, ensure controversial issues of public importance are presented in an honest, equitable, and balanced manner, and provide equal time to opposing candidates and public points of view. Restore that. We had that once upon a time.
And that wasn't that, because that's now what it is for public broadcasters, right? But you're saying on all broadcasters, they have to ensure equal time.
Well, that's not currently the law ever since Reagan. It once was the regulation under the FCC that they were required to provide equal time,
whether private or public.
Right.
Broadcaster.
But
right.
But currently there is no equal time provision at all.
Okay.
And then this gets to the last section I want to talk about, because this deals again with Congress. Election districts represented by members of Congress or by members of any state legislative body shall be compact and composed of contiguous territory.
Totally.
No gerrymandering.
Right.
The state shall have the burden of justifying any departures from this requirement by reference to neutral criteria such as natural, political, or historical boundaries or demographic changes, enhancing or preserving the power of any political party or individual shall not be such a neutral criterion. Congress shall apportion, and this is also, I think, important, Congress shall apportion the number of representatives according to the census to ensure the representation of a maximum of 250,000 people.
Okay, so you're saying like you can't have a congressional representative for less than for
well, what it is that our congressional districts now are a couple of million. I mean, it is
right. So you're saying to have a much bigger Congress,
right. So
many more representatives.
So what we do is they would have to subdivide Congress in their offices. They'd have to put in more desks. They'd have to take over the galleries up on top. So the freshman congressmen are up in the galleries. But basically, you'd have more access to your representatives, and your representatives would not have to raise millions
so much
of
money
dollars in order to just contact people in their district. So anyway, those are the first few sections I kind of wanted to go over tonight to give a sense of what the Voters' Bill of Rights is. It deals with multiple issues, but the purpose of it all is to evolve our government into something new and different.
Something more representative. Yeah, it's been really that's all really interesting, and it also exposes some of my ignorance to what's so about a lot of things, like the fact that you've got to backdoor it through the 14th Amendment to actually get equal access and equal rights, and the fact that the media, the broadcasters don't have an equal time provision. Those are all things that you have in Europe. You have an equal time provision in most democracies in Europe. And also, interestingly, the presidential system is considered to be less democratic than the parliamentary system, right? Because parliamentary system is less stable, because you can have the government, be thrown out in a minute a lot of times, and you see that in Britain happen quite a bit. But it is considered to be more democratic than the presidential system.
Well, yeah, well, it is, because what you have your elected representatives forming your government.
Right.
Basically, it's like Congress. What would it be like? The Speaker of the House would be our Prime Minister.
Right, exactly. The Speaker of the House is the Prime Minister, as long as they remain Speaker. And the reality is that there can be, changes in the political weather, and they could lose their speakership. They could lose their office, as we've seen happen often to the Prime Minister. I mean, it makes for a less stable government, a less stable system, but it does make for a more democratic system. And that's kind of where a lot of, and especially for emerging democracies, you want them to have more of a parliamentary system than a presidential, because they've already got issues with democracy to begin with. So it's an interesting, all these things you say are really, and you can really see how it could be a real shot in the arm to our democracy to have these things in place, because the fact that you could, you would represent, say you have a representative for every 250,000 people. I mean, that makes it feel like more, not only would your representative be more accessible, but it also makes it feel like running for office doesn't seem so out of the realm of possibility for regular people too. Because it feels like you could conceive of potentially raising enough money to run for an office of that size versus representing millions of people, and the sort of like competition that would be at play in those sorts of races. So I think that it's a really and just the way that the Voters' Bill of Rights deals with the captured interests, the special interests, and the whole idea that you can have corporations have political speech, and what that's done. I mean, really, Citizens United, what was that, in the 2000s it was passed? I mean, we already had a pretty bad situation with money in politics before that. But then after that, it allowed it to become a complete cesspool, Right. I mean, and actually in that video, I was talking about the New York Times video, one of the departing congressmen, he said, in order for me to get on the committee, I have to raise $250,000 within the party. Yeah, he says this, and the thing has to raise money. And I'm just thinking, it wasn't really clear to me what that means. Like, raise the money. I guess you got to raise money in order to get the committee appointment in
I've
Congress. You
never
have
heard
to
that.
raise money for the party coffers or something.
Right. That
In
doesn't
order,
surprise me, but it's, yeah.
I mean, he said that, and you just think to yourself, what a, you know, how this is so divorced from the idea that of what we have of representative government, really, how divorced it is when it's about how much money you raise.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
it's just really bribery. I mean, you can disguise it as campaign contributions. You're paying for access so that they'll return your phone call, this or that or whatever. But no, it's just out and out bribery, because who's paying? For this particular committee, let's say it's a transportation committee that's regulating the trucking industry. Where is that representative going to go to get that money to bring in to get that appointment to that particular committee, except for those that it's going to be looking at and regulating in some way.
right, right, yeah.
So how do we change this? What can be done? When Roosevelt was elected, and he carried the whole Congress with him. He suddenly he had a Congress that would pass his legislation, and we need something like that. We need a Congress that will come in and actually take charge and write laws and act collaboratively in doing so with and not that is something that must occur, because otherwise we don't have self-government. And self-government is the most important thing we have to preserve our liberties, our right to not be interfered with in life. Uh, and I think that this vulnerability of Congress, even though they represent these large districts and they have a lot of people they represent, they still have to go out there every 2 years and get reelected. And so they're out there in their districts, and
Yeah.
they're out there right now. That's why they don't get a lot done in Congress, because they keep running home to their districts in order to meet with
Donors.
their donors. But that I think that if there is anyone who is watching this and who had asked themselves, what can I do? Well, of course you can vote. I mean, that's the most important thing you can do. You can go vote. But what you can do is that you can ask every one of your elected representatives, your city council, your county supervisors, your state legislators, your governors, your congressman, your who's running for Senate, uh, every elected position in this country should be asked, do you support the Voters' Bill of Rights?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
And when they say, what are you talking about? What's the Voters' Bill of Rights?
then you better find out. That's something they had better find out about, and give them the link to it, and give them a copy of it, and come back and ask them the next week, do you support this or not? And if they don't, then that's their position. They don't support the Voters' Bill of Rights. And if they say, well, I support all of these, but I don't support this, that's not the question. Do you support the Voters' Bill of Rights? Because it will take all of this to make a change. Any one part of this is just patching the tire, changing the fan belt. It's not going to get the car to its destination. It's going to maybe get it a little further down the road, but we're not going to get to where we truly have a really effective representative democracy, which is what it takes. That our representatives truly represent those who elect them, and that's the most critical thing we're facing in this country today. I think is achieving an effective representative democracy, because if we don't, we're not going to address the problems. I mean, we got huge problems. I mean, there's no, you can count on, every finger and toe you have the major problems that we are being confronted with in this country today. But we're not going to fix any of them unless we are able to get an effective working government, and that's what we don't have. And it's not going to get fixed by who we elect in November unless we do these other things. And that is what can be done starting right now. And that is in the 6 months between now and the election, that question could be posed to every single candidate for every elective office in this country, as a movement. And the change that will occur would be that the Voters' Bill of Rights would be on the agenda for the next Congress. And that's passed. It could go to the states. It could be ratified, and we could have a change of government within the next 4 years. Within this next administration, we could have a new government, a government that would be responsive to the people, that would protect us and defend us, and would listen to us, and it would be our government. It would not be bought and paid for by the wealthy and the elite.
Yeah, what I like about this is that it's not a left-right proposal. It's like it's for whoever you are. It's about feeling like you've actually got a voice in the government and that the government isn't completely captured by special interests and money. And I really feel like that's something that wherever you are on the political spectrum, you can see with your own naked eye what's gone on in our political bodies and how we need to get money out of politics if we want to have anything that corresponds to what we want our government to be doing. And I don't know that everybody, I don't know. I mean, I think that most people would diagnose that as the main problem, but I don't know. I mean, would they? I think that that's the key thing, because I think that that's what would motivate people to do what you're saying, is if they're arriving at the same conclusion about what the problem is.
Well, I think a lot of people say, well, that's why we're having an election. We're going to have an election, and a lot of people are going to say, well, I think Donald Trump will come back in, and he will he'll take charge and clean up everything, or Steady Joe will stick around and get things taken care of for the next 4 years. But it's not going to change the government. It's not going to make it more responsive. It's not going to deal with these major issues. There's still going to be this impasse in Congress that nothing gets done. Well,
I mean, I think we can say, okay, nothing gets done. And I'm not saying, I mean, all these people I was talking about at the beginning, these 12 people departing Congress, they all said it's dysfunctional. But I do want to say that one of the biggest things that was keeping me awake at night was getting, the aid to Ukraine. It did happen. Now, it happened way too late, and it was such a mess. And so, but I do want to acknowledge that it happened. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to act like absolutely nothing has happened. However, the fact of what it took to make that happen, and the fact that you have an immigration bill that was actually bipartisan, and then Trump sunk it because he didn't want to give his opponent any kind of legislative victory. Like, these are the things that you got to look at and say to yourself, the congressional body, it doesn't have its own backbone. It doesn't have its own voice. It doesn't have its own sort of power. It's just being buffeted by these other forces. It's like a plaything in the presidential political sort of race at the moment. And that's where I see what you're saying about our Congress. It's almost like we need to reinvigorate our Congress. It's been disempowered, right? It's been disempowered because look at the way it's been treated like a pawn. The House of Representatives has been treated like a pawn, and we all suffer. I mean, Ukraine funding didn't happen for like 7 months. The immigration bill, I mean, the immigration, I agree the border's a mess. I mean, I don't disagree, but they had something that actually was going to really help address things, and it couldn't get passed for political reasons. Like, this is not serving us, this is not serving us. And I think we can all see that those are stunning examples of that.
Well, I think what you spotted, and the most important thing about the Voters' Bill of Rights is that it is nonpartisan. Our rights of liberty are something we all possess individually, and that is what we're at the risk of losing if we don't evolve our government. I mean,
Evolve,
violent
exactly.
revolution is not the answer. The only way that we will achieve a government that will really be effective and take care of the people will be an evolutionary process, and it will be the process itself that will be a part of the change. The fact that we would go through this would be a part of the change. That would be, we can evolve our government, but for us to evolve as a people, we have to evolve our government. We have to do it ourselves so that we as a people will also change the nature of our society. And everything that we're doing here, and one of the things that was exciting with you agreeing to have these discussions with me is that we would do so in a nonpartisan way, as to the greatest extent possible.
Yeah.
And with that, I would like to segue to another thing that is going on, and that is the campus protest.
Yeah.
In this country that are taking place, and again, this doesn't require you to either be on either side of these positions, whether you are pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli or just fed up
or neither.
with what's going on.
Yeah.
But the right to protest is crucial. Because that is the one thing that people can't do to make their voices heard, is to protest in some symbolic and meaningful way. I mean, you can do it by pouring gasoline all over yourself and setting yourself on fire, or you can go pitch a tent, in the commons of your university and say, look, folks, we've got a point of view and it's being ignored. It's not being listened to.
It's about feeling ignored and feeling like you have no way of being heard, right? You have no way of ensuring you're heard. You have to make things a bit uncomfortable. I mean, this is the thing about the campus protests, is that there seems to be a sort of agreement, and the sort of just when I watch the news or watch whatever, there's an agreement that the protests have now been taken over by people who are anti-Semitic, and that there's an anti-Semitism to the protests, and that's a way of delegitimizing the protests. I'm not at any of these universities. I'm not watching what's being said. I can't sit there and say, yes, for sure, what's going on is that there isn't anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic things being said, or that there isn't this and that. I don't know. But all I can say is I become suspicious when you have this sort of line that said to delegitimize one side. It makes me suspicious of what's really going on here. And so I reserve that position where I don't have a position one way or the other about what's actually, all I know is that when I look at it, I feel like the way that it's being covered and the kind of consensus that seems that the elites are kind of saying about these protests is that that they've been taken over and they're anti-Semitic, and that they're basically illegitimate protest. They're no longer legitimate because of that. And I think we've all seen this happen too much in other formats and other places and other times where an understandable potentially point of view on something was delegitimized because it was labeled as something, or that there was there was a kind of way that it was framed that made it you couldn't agree. We weren't allowed. Like now, if you say, so all I do is question, and I feel like in this environment, and again, this is another like sign for me that something's off, because I feel like even by saying this, I'm putting myself in the category of people who are, anti-Semitic, that I would question whether these protests were the so it that in and of itself, it's like everyone will say you have the right to protest. They'll say that you have the right to protest, but you have to do it this way. You can't be anti-Semitic. You can't make people feel uncomfortable. You can't And I do. I'm not saying I disagree with that, but the way that these protests have been framed in the media and framed by a lot of people makes me suspicious about whether they've just been delegitimized. This other thing is being said about them to just delegitimize them, and to basically prevent us from really looking at what the protesters are trying to say, which is we don't feel like, because again, this is about in my view, it's about a special interest. There are special interests at play in our government that have basically completely dictated in some ways this policy toward Israel for decades, and there are people who are saying, wait a minute, we can't go. I mean, look at what's going on. We can't just support them just annihilating an entire 2 million people. And you won't listen to us. We're going to go sit in the campus commons. But again, you feel like you can't say that anymore because these protests have now been called anti-Semitic. So if you raise those questions, then you're either dumb, you're not paying attention, or you're wrong, or you're anti-Semitic yourself.
Well,
and so
I saw that a month or two ago, it was the college presidents who were before Congress. Today, it was the school board superintendent of Berkeley Unified School District. Was before Congress testifying, been ordered before Congress to testify about anti-Semitism in the Berkeley schools. So,
it's feeling like the House and Un-American Committee thing, Un-American Activities Committee. That's what it feels like to me. When I watch this questioning and stuff.
Well, I'm going to dance around this a little bit. Back in one of my lives before, when I was the operations officer of a major security consulting and investigation firm, we represented Fortune 500 companies. And one of the things that we did was to prepare these companies for what would you do if you get a problem that confronts you in some way. And
right.
So, there's a whole method to what you do. You get the truth out as best you can, but you do this, you do that.
Right.
Part of it's information management.
You leak things on purpose, or you do this or that.
But there are specialists who do this. And what strikes me here is that what we're seeing is a very sophisticated response to this that is intended very quickly to delegitimize it. And also we have seen this same response in other efforts in the past to deal with Israel's occupation of its conquered territories and other issues that come up as to whether or not it is a legitimate government, and again the response to that very quickly becomes that you're acting anti-Semitically in what you're saying, which I don't know how to respond to that. I think my life is
I know, your life is an example.
My life is an example that that this isn't true. But by the same token, we have to be able to look at issues and to come to conclusions about issues based on facts as best we can identify the facts. And that's what I think
But see, this is the thing, as you say, as best as we can identify the facts. So you and I'm not going to go, I haven't driven to Berkeley to sit there and witness what's going on. Are they saying certain things? Are they saying from the river to the sea? Are they yelling, you know, are they harassing Jewish students to walk by? I mean, like, and you haven't done that either, I don't think. And so we rely on reporting because we ourselves, I'm not in the campus commons in Columbia. I can't tell you, you know, I know they took over Hamilton Hall, but that's, I mean, so you rely on this. So then you're basically in a position where you have to put trust in the reporting that's coming out. Or the way I feel right now is I'm not entirely sure that I trust everything that seems to be taken for granted, that so it leaves you in this position where you feel like there's something, for me, I feel like I'm suspicious and I'm not sure I really agree with what's going on, but I also don't feel like I'm in a position to fully assert one thing or the other. I just stay in this sort of like limbo zone about it. Yeah.
Well, we'll get to that in another section of the Voters' Bill of Rights.
Okay.
Oh, yes. There's another section we will talk about later where well, it's actually coming up. Well, actually, we could talk about it. How much time do we have? Are we getting
maybe another 10 minutes max?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is the next section in order after the Congress and the congressional districts. It shall be a primary function of the government to ensure that the people are supplied with truthful, unbiased, objective, and timely information regarding the political, economic, environmental, financial, and social issues that affect them, and that all students are educated in the nature and responsibilities of representative democracy. The University of the United States shall be established to incorporate all federal service academies and to provide education on the nature and responsibilities of representative democracy, the meaning of freedom, and the appropriate limitations on the use of coercion and force. And so that's what our government should be doing, is that we should be investigating these situations, but in doing it honestly and submitting, and preparing position papers on these things.
Well, I think I get where you're going with that section. I think it's when we say it's the duty of the government to ensure timely, unbiased, everything information. I think we have to think about the freedom of the press too. I mean, like, in terms of, because I do think that once you have the government getting too involved in the media, that's a problem. I mean, if we say the government's going to ensure that, I'm not sure how that can functionally happen if they're not being too involved in editorial policy. So that's where I have a question about that piece of things, as opposed to just helping these, because what they could do is supply funding for independent media, funding for public broadcaster, that sort of thing, and be far away from the editorial board and those sorts of things.
Well, I didn't intend for any part of that to indicate an editorial role.
Right.
Also keep in mind that we earlier had already talked about the freedom of the press.
Right.
As
Right.
being absolute.
Right.
I mean, that comes before we get to the duty of government to supply truthful information to the greatest extent possible.
To supply truthful information, and also because we're coming to a situation now in the media, and I know this is I just want to say this. We're coming to a situation now in the media where the media is just financially having a hard time sustaining itself unless it's a really big media outlet, right? I mean, like, so I actually think there's a role for the government to help, like, through grants and everything else, to help fund media more, in the sense of helping them provide the financial foundation for the unbiased reporting that we need. I do think there's more of a role for the government in that side of things, especially now.
Well, yeah, but having once worked in government and then having had some responsibility for government funding, that also worries me as to how that money, who gets the money and how is it allocated and so
Yeah.
forth and so on.
Yeah.
But also I do think though that the internet itself, our social media, is a way to also have this have a role,
Mm-hmm.
along with a free press.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm. As a platform. Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
because it's open. I mean, I know that myself over the years I've published dozens and dozens of articles, where
Mm-hmm.
I certainly I could not have done that without the internet and
Right.
without the digital publishers on the internet.
Right.
Uh,
Right. Right.
that they use free content. They don't pay for content. People submit their articles to them, and they edit, they publish them, they edit them, they put together uh, journals or daily news blogs or whatever. But I think that it is a crisis, and I don't know that anything that you and I are going to do or say here is going to make a difference, Joann, but this is what we can do.
It's what we can do. And you never know. I mean, I think it's important to do what you can do. I mean, because you never know what kind of spark it could light. And so I think it's important to do what we're doing. And also, to start, I mean, I want to ask my representative about will they support the Bill of
Well,
Rights,
I
the
will do
voters' Bill
that
of
too.
Rights.
How's that?
Yeah.
That's something we can each do.
We can each do
We can
that
each
before we
ask
meet
our
next.
representatives whether they support the Voters' Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
Yes, that is something that we can do.
But let's do that before we meet next time, and then we can see if we got any response.
Okay, so I'm off for a 5-day trip getaway.
Well, that's okay. You have
But that's
time
okay.
before we, next time. It's all right. It's fine.
But also let me just say this, that since we last met, 2,750 people have watched our last video.
That's great.
Yeah.
Hey, I love it.
And the ones before it were running about 1,500, 1,200. So people are watching us as we sit here gabbing about politics and philosophy. And
Well, I mean,
and what's interesting is that a lot of them, there's a goodly percentage that are watching them all the way through. I mean, you start off and you start off at the top, and and your
right.
curve slowly goes down. But we are, we're hanging on to people. Most of the people halfway through, we're hanging on to a goodly percentage all the way to the end. So,
Well, thank you for watching.
yes. And folks, if you like what you see here, give us a like, subscribe to the channel,
Yeah.
and share this. But I spent time this last week also going through this book, folks, the Transforming America. You can get it for free along with all of my books on my website, williamjohncox.com. If you like a print copy, you get it. I have my books printed at Amazon at cost. I try to make them as cheap as I can for people who like to hold a book. I know I do. I like to go through and
highlight things,
and I like to write
yeah,
margins and edit it. But really, it's a really good history of the country, of the political history of the country, of the things that took place and how we got to where we are today, and an analysis of the Voters' Bill of Rights. So that take a look at that and go to the vote.io. The vote.io is the place where you can go and watch the flag waving in the breeze. with a gold stripe on it. And we've added a gold stripe to the flag from the bottom left to the top right for the people of the United States, because they should be represented on the flag as well as the states. And you can go there and you can vote, and maybe we'll do something on with the vote.io for contacting your representatives. Maybe we can have something there. This shows up by state as to how you work by state, but anyway, that's
yeah, like if you've contacted your representatives, you like log it on the vote, like
right.
who's been contacted and who's responded, and I
Right.
know it might be kind of interesting.
Yeah, as to what the candidates are, and list the candidates and have it by perhaps by congressional district. It's I'm looking for a new webmaster. My poor webmaster in England has carpal tunnel syndrome.
Oh,
Both
too
hands.
much webmastering.
Too much webmastering. So it does take some work to keep all these websites up, but.
Of course it does. Yeah, it's a lot of work. You're doing the Lord's work there. Yeah,
Well,
that's what you said a long time ago about our old work at the state bar.
yes, well, Joann, cheers
Thanks,
to the
William.
people, and may your vote never be taken for granted, because
That's
it's our
right.
consent to be governed that is the crucial thing we have talked about here. And
Yes,
and that's very, very important. We must regain that, so that we truly have control of our government, because then we will have a better government. I mean, that's the idea of it. If we don't vote and we have no responsibility for our government, then we're going to get the government we deserve, which
that's right.
is kind of scary. So, cheers. Enjoy the talk.
Cheers.
Talk to you next
Take
week.
care, William. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.